Thank you for joining our talk. We're here today to talk to you about how to build a user acquisition strategy that converts. My name's Alice. I am a senior growth consultant on the retention team at Phiture, which is a mobile growth consultancy based in Berlin. And I've been working in the retention and engagement space for the last 3 years, working with different apps across different service verticals.
And I'm Natalie. I'm on the paid acquisition team, mainly focusing on managing client ad spend across the self-serve ad networks like Facebook, Google, Snapchat, TikTok, and other search platforms. So, Phiture is an award-winning consultancy. As Alice said, we're based in Berlin, and we service different apps across a few different services, including retention, performance marketing, app store optimization, and data analytics. So here are just some of the apps we've worked with, and just wanted to make a shout out that our co-founder Moritz and our ASO lead Maggie and some other amazing Phiture team members have written the second ASO book. You can find it online at asoebook.com. And I'll hand it over to Alice.
All right, let's get started. So basically, first of all, let's give you an overview of the sort of relationship between user acquisition and the product team. Here is like a classic scenario that we see when working with clients. Often our clients will have lots of different great growth initiatives spanning different teams and different tools. But what comes with that sometimes is a lot of chaos and a lot of situations where teams are kind of working in silos. And sometimes as well, even like the tools can be a bit siloed and they're not really speaking to each other. So what we want to do today is give you some practical tips and tricks for getting these two teams, in particular performance marketing and CRM or product, to be really kind of regularly checking in with each other, speaking to each other as you go along and making sure that you are aligned on your kind of growth strategy and your common goals. It was really nice as well this morning. There was a couple of people in the product panel. I don't know if anyone caught that, but they were also talking about alignment between teams. So it's really great to hear that lots of people have this topic on their minds at the moment. So what we want to do here is we want to present to you a hypothetical scenario. So this is our kind of made up app. It's called Zen. It's a meditation app. And throughout this presentation, we're going to tie some of our practical examples to our hypothetical app as we go along, just so that it's easier to follow. So Zen has been growing steadily for the last 5 years in terms of MAU. It's what we would consider like a mid-stage startup. The company has grown from 30 employees to over 100 in the last 5 years. And even though the speed of growth is impressive, it's resulted in scenarios where user acquisition and CRM teams are working in silos. They have limited visibility on what each other are doing. And this causes a lot of friction in terms of growing an engaged user base. So this is the kind of complaint that we would hear from the CRM team or the CRM perspective. So you might have someone that says, our trial starts have been on the decline for the last 3 months, for example, and the data seems to coincide with an increase in acquisition spend. We need to tell the UA team that they are bringing poor quality users to the app. So as you can see here, quite often, like the CRM person would maybe jump to the conclusion. There's a bit of finger pointing and they would just kind of conclude. I can see some nodding heads in the room, so maybe you've kind of experienced this type of scenario yourself. But they're jumping to this conclusion without really bringing in the acquisition side to kind of look at the problems together.
Yeah, and then on the other hand, from the advertising perspective, as a UA manager, what you're probably hearing that person say is that these people are churning, we're targeting, maybe a CPI or CPA, we're getting them through the door, but then after that, we don't really know or care what happens because we're meeting our KPI. We're spending the money, the budgets we have, and we're doing our job. It's kind of then up to the product to convert the user once they're in. And then a lot of times also there's a struggle between having like the product roadmap visibility. So what are going to be the upcoming features? What are users actually caring about most? A lot of times there's lack of like user surveys or really understanding what it is that's driving the users to fall off or just install but then not come back into the app. So basically, to summarize that relationship, it's just, as Alice said, a lot of finger pointing and the two teams just blaming each other. When the UA team tries to increase ad spend, then the product team usually blames the UA team for bringing in poor quality traffic, but then vice versa. You don't really always have that visibility. So that's kind of what we're going to talk you through today. And where we can sort of start is just understanding the user funnel. So for the example that we have with Zen, the meditation app, the user is installing. The paid campaigns are bringing the users in to complete their onboarding. It's showing them an overview of what the app is. They complete their first meditation. And for performance marketing purposes, that's all about, maybe we care about because we're probably optimizing on like a cost per first meditation complete or something like that. And then what the retention team is going to care about, and the product team, is are those users actually coming back and becoming habitual users? Otherwise, why are we spending like our effort and money on growing that user base if they're not going to continue coming back? And so the focus should be aligning both teams together to understand what it is in the onboarding and activation that will then, first get them there, but then why do they drop off after? So this sort of starts with just simple stage where the UA team sets the events that they're going to be tracking in the MMP to involve the product CRM teams and also the data team, because it's super important that the data team is aligned with the funnel of the users and what we're tracking, what the UA team is optimizing towards, and then what the product and retention team is going to be optimizing towards. So yeah, you have to kind of pick your most important events on an MMP. You're limited to 6 usually. And in the case of Zen, what were the onboarding funnel we'd be following. So the person installs, then they sign up, they complete their onboarding, they have their first meditation, and then they buy like a subscription to the app.
All right, so now that we kind of understand what the typical relationship might look like, particularly using our Zen example, let's talk about laying the foundations, so some practical things that you can actually do to start to kind of solve some of these issues. So the first one's really obvious. If you don't already do this, then make sure that you have monthly team-wide syncs, or it could be even as regular as you feel is appropriate. And this is really crucial to support your growth goals and make sure that everybody's on the same page. So we would also not just recommend having marketing and product, but also bring your creative and data teams in there together so that you're kind of, everybody's looking at the same data set and basically speaking the same language. The benefits of this would be increased visibility on the product roadmap, and you can get feedback from the different teams in real time, so you can kind of be more reactive to certain problems that you see. You can also gain a deeper understanding of valuable events or metrics that you want to track across the team and across the lifecycle, user lifecycle as well. And also you can kind of understand where the other teams are coming from. Often when we find that teams are working in silos, you find out that like the CRM team sometimes doesn't even really understand fully what it is that the acquisition team is doing, and vice versa. So it's just having that sync where you can really kind of discuss these problem areas, but also kind of, have a bit of knowledge sharing in there as well. And this also allows for more strategic creative planning across user acquisition and UX. Both teams as well should align on what the specific targets are, and then don't just leave it there, like regularly analyze them together. So if you want to do that in the same kind of brainstorming session, or if you want to set up regular syncs to basically kind of look at the data set together, it can be really, really helpful.
Yeah, so from the performance marketing perspective, what we're probably caring about, well, first of all, always making sure that like the user lifetime value is greater than the customer acquisition cost. Otherwise, you're not going to become profitable at some point down the line. What basically, again, like we on the performance marketing team care about is some certain like CPI or CPA. And then once it gets past, we meet that, and then we sort of don't really look much past how these users are staying in and so forth. And another critical component of that also is to kind of incorporate whoever's working on the organic growth side of it. So discussing incrementality and having your data team support organic uplift analysis to basically see what the differences are between your paid versus blended KPIs, because what you'll find is that for every paid user, you're also bringing in, X organic users. And so you might actually have a bit more room to then manage a bit higher budgets on channel X, Y, or Z. And that kind of summarizes the performance marketing perspective.
Yeah, and then I think from the CRM or product perspective, what we can do is basically support user acquisition to have a more granular look at the data. So looking beyond like the user acquisition key metrics to, for example, you might want to look at core retention metrics to understand if users are actually coming back and gaining value from the app, and kind of reaching the key features that and touch points that you want them to reach. And then you can also look together at like how does the performance of these users or the user behavior compare between obviously your organic traffic versus paid. And then at that point as well, that would be where you could discuss like updates to the product roadmap. And more importantly as well, things that are in the pipeline that either team might want to be aware of. So for example, if there's going to be an upcoming change in acquisition strategy, this would be like the right time to kind of bring that up so that the product and lifecycle teams can accommodate that. This is like a really kind of straightforward recommendation, but it amazes me like how many companies don't do this regularly enough. So I would recommend, first of all, keep your taxonomy clean. So your taxonomy document should be one centralized source of truth where all the different teams within the organization can basically use this document to understand at any point what the sort of key custom events and attributes or user level data points are. It helps to have at least one person who's like responsible for kind of regularly checking in on this and making sure that it's updated, because in a fast or high growth environment, this is the kind of thing that can slip and you feel like it's maybe not that important at the time, but then this is the kind of thing that causes silos because maybe, for example, on Zen's UA team, they're calling a custom event that we would use or like a user behavior that we would analyze a totally different name, and it's just small things like that causes this kind of friction. So yeah, getting everybody basically to speak the same technical language is really, really important. And then I heard this being mentioned this morning as well, but another thing that I would recommend is if you can, invest in a CDP or a customer data platform, so something like Segment or mParticle, especially in like a high growth or fast moving environment. It can be really helpful to have a CDP, which is basically acts as a middleman for the data. So you have like your entire tool stack, but really you're just piping all of your events and attributes into this one middleman, which is the CDP. And then the CDP, every time you add a new tool to your stack, it will basically pipe the exact same events and attributes into each tool as you kind of grow and move along. And that's just really important for simple things like naming conventions, making sure things are named the same way. I've worked with, for example, apps where the subscription event looks different in multiple different tools. And so then when you're looking in your product analytics tool and teams are trying to get together to understand the trends on trial starts and trial conversions, it's just messy because everybody's talking about or using different names and different kind of language. So yeah, just to wrap up this section, basically you want to have a solid foundation that drives clean and democratized data at its core. That you have the CRM team and the UA team and their expertise kind of working together rather than working on two completely different pages. And this would basically drive a holistic overview of the traffic quality and product pain points and enable you to be kind of reactive to situations, or even better, proactive, so you can kind of foresee where these pain points are going to be and then work together to come up with solutions. And ultimately, we believe that when you have this kind of solid structural foundation, that's when it's much easier to drive business impact along the way. Okay, so I'm going to hand over to Natalie to talk about applying the foundation. But first of all, we're just talking quickly about some of the topics that for example, Zen in our example meditation app would observe and discuss in regular syncs together. So from the user acquisition perspective, of course, that would be the new user journey and the return on ad spend. But from CRM, really the point that we're trying to make here is that when you kind of combine these two teams together, CRM can provide a more granular or microscopic view on the user behavior. So not just, great, we're bringing in users and they're kind of signing up and then that's it, but also being able to provide information on exactly how long it takes them to complete onboarding, which events these users are triggering first after onboarding, so how quickly they can reach the aha moment, as we call it in product. And then also we can give more granular information on like what the kind of profile of user is that's actually starting a trial through behavioral analysis, and then obviously looking at long-term retention metrics as well.
So if we were to actually apply this with the example of Zen, and we had the UA and CRM teams kind of sitting down together, and let's say, for instance, they wanted to look at the user funnel because the campaigns were hitting the CPI goal, but beyond that, we were seeing it was driving poor traffic. And so when the user acquisition team, let's say we were just to only look at the paid traffic, we might then at that point blame the product and say, we're bringing in the traffic, it's like the product that's not converting the users. But when we compare the organic traffic, we kind of see the same thing. And although the drop-off isn't as high as it is for organic as it is for paid. And usually conversion rates on organic are higher anyway, but this might indicate that on the first open to sign up rate, there's some issues that we should try to figure out before we invest more and more money into our advertising strategy. And so when we go to the next slide, let's say that at that point, we're investing, majority of our budget on paid UA channel 3, the green line, that has the highest retention at the beginning of the funnel, but later on, after weeks, it's one of the lowest converting channels. So how we might better direct that traffic, and it would be to kind of shift that to the paid UA channel 1, right, where you see the later end of that curve, the retention is 2% versus everything else is around 0. But if we were only kind of looking at those early metrics, we wouldn't know that and we wouldn't be able to make those right decisions. So the retention team at this point, the product teams, they're able to kind of support us and bridge the gap where we can look at this together, make the decisions together, and better direct that UA traffic and not really necessarily blame product as well. So one other note that we have in the little right-hand side there is that this is a bit limiting with iOS 15 because of the SKI network and timer issues on iOS ad spend. I mean, unless you're showing the ATT prompt and you're getting a really big chunk of your users that are prompting in, then you will have this visibility, but for most advertisers, you won't. So you'll need to move a bit slower in figuring out where to ramp your budgets up and down. So if you have maybe sort of like a hunch from maybe historical data that you can study that data and you can see historically channel 1, 2, or 3 has brought in higher or lower traffic. You can then test ramping one up and down. Try to control one at a time and then assess what does your overall data look like. So along the onboarding funnel, how does it shift over time? Along retention, how does your blended CPI, CPA look? So it's just going to be a bit more limiting on iOS 15. It's still possible, but just have to move at a slower pace, kind of like you do with everything else with iOS 15.
Yep. So if we were to recommend this to a client and they were to, like Zen, for example, and they were to implement all of these strategies and have this foundation in place, the outcome is basically happier teams that are working together. That's obvious. But things like, for example, the CRM manager would be able to say, we've increased visibility on long-term channel health and now understand the pain points across the UA team. The data analyst would say, we have a better idea of what reports will bridge the gaps to study our users. The user acquisition manager as well is also happy and would be able to say something like, we realize that focusing on CPA and early retention indicators has led us in perhaps the wrong direction. And of course, we've added the creative leads in here as well. It's important not to forget the creative team. So they would maybe, for example, say, now we know we need to enhance our creative testing strategy for channel 1. So it's like everybody has a clearer idea on the sort of holistic strategy and how it all kind of ties in together. All right, so just to wrap this up, Natalie, if you want to hand over.
Yeah, so basically we just want to summarize that it is important to regularly meet with those 4 teams that we mentioned: product, creative, data, and the marketing teams. How often that happens will depend on the team. It's not going to really happen overnight where you're going to come in and say, all four teams are going to meet together. There's a lot of different stakeholders involved. And there's going to be a lot of different perspectives as well. So you want to try to find sort of like a mediator or a sprint leader that's going to bridge the gap, like that really understands all sides of it and understands the importance of collaborating. And what this person can then do is like set goals, agendas for each meeting. Maybe the individual teams are meeting like Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays, but together, you meet every 2 weeks or a month, whatever that cadence is, to get set up. And what we've done is implemented like just a high-level timeline of what it could sort of look like. So you have goals or like objectives to hit, as you leave today. So maybe within the first 3 months, you kind of are aiming to ensure that your taxonomy is clean, your tracked events and KPIs are all aligned on between all the teams. Everyone has a good understanding of what everything means across each team. And at this point, too, you're integrated with all the necessary tools. And maybe this is going to take a bit longer because it's potentially a bigger investment. It could be something that you kind of do over the course of the year. But ideally, you're at least prioritizing to figure out which tools you're going to need to adapt to over the first few months of kind of bringing everyone together. And then within the first 6 months, you have your data team support to build out reports that are accessible and understandable to all of the teams. So like if your creative person wants to jump in and understand how the ads that they're designing are doing on Facebook or Google, then they're able to jump in and see, and maybe there's also some stitch in with retention rates. So again, like it bridges the gap between knowing whether this creative is just meeting a certain CPI or CPA, but is it actually bringing people back in? And then by the end of the year, hopefully within a year, you're able to kind of like really synchronize all the teams together. You're then understanding whether your users are actually profitable. So we said here, like you're starting to measure this. It's not necessarily you find that they are profitable, but you at least start to measure, get everybody on the same page and plan for how you could be if you're not. And if you are, then maybe you figure out a bigger growth strategy. And then, you're running like in-depth user level analyses, and you're running like A/B tests. The product team is kind of keeping everyone informed of what's going to be coming down the pipeline on releases. Maybe you're regularly making updates because you're talking to users and they're finding that this new feature that they've always wanted to have isn't yet available, and we reprioritize the development for that. And then, your creative team, again, like super important that they're involved because at the end of the day, they're spending all this time building the ads, and we know that creative strategy is key to user acquisition. And so having them in the loop will not only bring them satisfaction, but like also kind of empower them to have more knowledge on what it is they should be producing, not only for user acquisition, but app store optimization as well. So like maybe they'll have a better idea of what A/B tests to run within the first 3 screenshots, aligning the storefront a bit more, and kind of bringing in the ASO and acquisition team all under the UA umbrella. So Yeah, that's all we had for you guys today. Are there any questions? Okay, all good. Then we'll just leave you guys with that there's going to be an ASO conference happening in Berlin. We have super early bird discounts for 30% off until the end of this month. So you can register at asoconference.com.
Thank you very much.
Cool.